Are you ready for more Sunday Shelfies? My name's Niki, I'm the Obsessive Bookseller, and welcome to my channel. Today we are on week 1 of 9 of my young adult collection. I have read probably a third of what I own in these sections, and so the first several videos are going to be front-loaded with ones that I've read and can speak to. And the end half will be, your guess is as good as mine. Let's see what I can find on my shelves, because that seems to be one of the funnest aspects of these kind of series that I've been doing. So, I do not read YA very often anymore. There are a ton of really dense adult science fiction fantasies that I've been craving the complex plots. I've been craving the really deep character immersions. And if I do read a YA, it's kind of like a palate cleanser between other things. And I've decided that if I start reading a YA, I need to just do like the whole trilogy at once instead of trying to read the first book, then trying to read the second, and dragging the process out over the course of several months. So there are quite a few in here that I still really hope to get to eventually, but at my current rate, probably won't be for a while. But you know, moods change, and I have young kids, and so eventually they might enjoy these titles as well. So I'm hoarding a few of them for that. But when YA first started gaining a lot of traction, I read so many of them. And I am also one of those who read most of my YA when I was no longer a YA. I remember having some deep conversations with my friend about, like, how old is too old to continue enjoying these series? Apparently for me, the cutoff was about age 33. That's when I was like, okay, the last 20 things that I've read, I've rated really poorly, so maybe I should stop reading these for a while and just pick them up occasionally. And that system's been working well. I'm excited to show you what I've got, so let's go look at some books. Let me show you what this section looks like, because I really haven't featured it that often. But I have most of the books that I've read down on these bottom shelves, and then the ones that I haven't read kind of stored up there. So for the sake of this series, we're going to be going straight across. And then the next week we'll go straight across. I imagine these ones will go a little quicker than the adult ones, mostly because these books are a little bulkier than those, so there's fewer to talk about within each shelf. So yep, let's get started. And one of the reasons you don't see this section very often is because the lighting is kind of atrocious. But starting at the beginning here, we have the Sweetest Dark series by Shanna Abe. I picked this one up on a whim. She's a dragon shifter, that's all I knew going in, and it turned out to be one of the most beautifully written stories I'd ever read. It was so lovely, and if you like boarding schools with just a tiny element of magic and a sense of wonder and flowing writing, like, this is such a cool series. It did not get a lot of traction, so she ended up having to self-publish the third book. And the quality did not go down at all in this instance. Like, I really love that I read these. It wasn't until finishing the series that there were some weird characters at the end that I thought, okay, those have to be from other series. She treats them, like, with too much care. They seem really important. Who are they? And evidently this is set in the same world as this romance series, The Smoke Thief, which is frankly one of the only reasons why I'm keeping this series, is because I want more of that lovely writing. Next we have Enclave, the Razorland series by Anne Aguirre. I only have the first two. I liked the first two a little more than the third one, and I never felt compelled to complete the collection. But I did enjoy it. One of my first zombie novels, and I think I read it back when World War Z came out, and I was just so sick of selling zombie books that I could puke, but this one I liked. It was a little grittier than I was expecting it to be for a YA. Back then a lot of them were kind of fluffy, and so this one had a little bit of an edge, and I decided I liked that aspect of it. Eve and Adam by Michael Grant and Catherine Applegate, aka K.A. Applegate, who wrote the Animorph series. Her name on this is the only reason I picked it up, because I love the Animorph series. I haven't read anything by Michael Grant, but I have his Gone series, and I'm hoping to get to it at some point. And there was a time where dystopians and futuristic novels and like cyborgs and all sorts of things were coming out, and I was wildly interested in all of them. This book was not fantastic. I did not enjoy it very well. I'd probably, in hindsight, give it maybe a 2-star, but I'm hanging on to it because I really like the cover and just out of nostalgia for the author. It's a good thing I'm not evaluating whether or not to keep or donate things from this section yet, because I would find that a little hard. I've had them for so long. The most recent young adult series that I've read, The Summoning by Kelly Armstrong. I have read most of her Woman of the Otherworld series. Bitten is still one of my all-time favorite books. That first book is amazing, and then it kind of peters out from there. So I thought, okay, I'm in the mood for a YA. Let me pick up something from an adult writer who I know I really like. And The Summoning was fantastic. This girl is a necromancer. It's kind of a asylum/boarding school setting. I love schools, by the way, so anytime that includes that element, I'm a little more interested than I would have been otherwise. But this first book, oh my gosh, so good, so creepy. I was listening to it before bed, and I just had to like lay awake there for a while with my eyes open, looking at the ceiling, trying to get grounded back in my world because it freaked me out so much. And granted, I'm a wimp, so this probably won't scare anybody else, but the fact that it was able to evoke anything out of me was just awesome. And then I read the second book. Oh my gosh. One of the worst melodramatic, awful filler, like middle book syndrome novels I've ever read. I did not have a good experience with that one. But I thought, okay, maybe she'll bring it home in the third book. And she kind of did. It was a lot better than the second one, but I just thought the ending, like no spoilers, but I did not enjoy anything about where the story went. There were so many other ideas that I think would have been so much more satisfying. I feel like she had everything set up for something amazing and then just got tired of writing in there almost, you know? So there is a spin-off series to this that I have. I think the first one's called The Calling. We'll see it later on another tour. And I just have no interest in picking up that one now because this one let me down. But as a first book, like, you betcha, that one was awesome. Maybe even read it as a standalone and then decide for yourself what should happen next and consider that the ending. I love a good young adult fantasy book. So I read this one back when it first came out and liked it okay. I felt like it was a little thin. So great idea for a story, interesting character, interesting world, but nothing that really grabbed me. And now that the movie has come out and so many people geek out about this series, I'm like, did I miss something? Was it just me? Like, because I don't remember anything about it other than the fact that I, mildly enjoyed it. And then continued the second one. Couldn't tell you anything about it. Ooh, I have a signed copy. I didn't know I had a signed copy. That's pretty rad. So, like the second one, okay, I'm sure. And this third one, by this point I had switched to audio, and I tried to listen to the last maybe 25% of this book like 4 or 5 different times. I kept falling asleep. I was so bored. And I'm like, maybe it's just me. Maybe I need to listen during the day. And then as I was listening, my mind kept wandering to other things, and I still missed how it ended. So finally I just gave up. I marked it as read because I had actually read it so many times, but such a boring ending to a book. And people keep trying to endorse Six of Crows to me, and at some point I would like to read that because I do like her ideas, but I don't think I'm a fan of her writing. And people say that the other series are a lot more robust, I like them better, but this one kind of knocked me off that a little bit. But I do love these hardcovers. I think they're beautiful, so that's why they're still on my shelves. Perfected by Kate Jarvik Birch. I love this first book. It was so beautiful and eerie and subtle and weird and cool ideas and very well done, and one of the coolest things I've ever read. I was so enmeshed in this story. I loved it so much. One of my favorite books of all time. I would like to reread it. The second one was okay. It wasn't as magical as the first one, but still a solid read. I really enjoyed where the story went, was quite interested in a lot of things. And then the third one, it kind of petered out a little bit. But I'm really glad I know where the story went. And the fact that it petered out doesn't take away how much I still love the first book. There's a theme here. Are we noticing a theme? I think, aside from the Shanna Abe one, everything I've talked about so far, I'm like, yeah, it started well, but then it sucked. Maybe that's the problem with YA. Maybe they wrote a first book and it was awesome and then got commissioned for more and weren't able to keep producing, ran out of ideas, were forced to write a middle book where a middle book wasn't intended. I don't know, but either way, that is one of the main problems I have with the genre. Another one, Darkest Minds. I enjoyed this one. I'm pretty sure I got this signed. I met the author at the Vegas Valley Book Festival. Yep, pretty cool. And it was one of those like surreal moments because I'm pretty sure even though I was quite young when I met this author, I think she was still younger than me. And that made me like freak out. Like, what am I doing with my life? I'm not doing enough. The first book was really cool. As far as dystopians are concerned, it was one of the better ones I had read at the time. I liked the second one. I didn't really like the direction it took for a bit, and I felt like the plot was extended way too long. Like, the pacing was incredibly off. And I read these when just the first two were out. By the time the third one came out, I had forgotten enough that I would have had to reread, and so never made time to go back. And still haven't gone back. I did like the idea. One of those, I think it was one with kids with like magical abilities or whatever in a slightly dystopic era. Pretty decent. My Jennifer Lynn Barnes section. As much as I love fantasy and sci-fi, this is in contention for my top favorite young adult book of all time. I love it so much. I don't even know why. Like, the murder mystery aspect was so cool. They use a lot of psychology, and I really eat that stuff up in books. Anytime I can really get into the characters' heads and kind of like figure out what's going on based on like real psychological analysis. And she teaches psychology at Yale. So right there you've got a writer with a lot of knowledge and credibility who is really good at infusing that into her stories. And then you have an added element of kids with natural special abilities at a boarding school helping the FBI solve serial killer murders. Loved it, okay? Now, there's a short story somewhere in all here that I loved also, but second book, loved it. Third book, loved it. Fourth book, it was okay. The direction the story took was a little ridiculous and unbelievable, but it did wrap things up pretty well, and it was still written beautifully. So it's not a complete tarnish on the series. And then to that end, if you like the show Scandal, Kerry Washington, this is the YA version of that, and it was actually quite good. Like, a good use of a lot of complexity, but not so much that you can't follow what's going on. Interesting main character. I remember enjoying both of these. Now, that being said, I don't remember much about them. And I read them pretty close back to back, so I couldn't tell you where one book stopped and the other ended. But yes, quite liked those. Scorpion Rules by Erin Bow. This was a cool idea for a story. Really wild world building, really wild concept. The pacing of the book was a little off in places. Like, it was either incredibly rich and absorbing and you're glued to the pages, or you were kind of wandering around wondering, what are we focusing on right now? So it was a good mix of both. There is a second book in this duology, but I have not explored it. I liked what I read in the first one, but I haven't felt any like strong compulsion to read the next one, as more than just being a completionist, and it bothers me that I haven't. But yeah, that one was interesting. Atherton. Oh, I should mention this is not all YA. There is also a good mix of middle grade in here. I kind of put all my kids' stuff together. And I don't remember the reason why this kid is climbing this mountain, but I think the artwork is beautiful. And it does have a lot of illustrations on the inside, and I just think it's a cool looking book. The series goes on from there, but I was never really compelled to keep reading. It's one of those that if I didn't think was pretty, I'd probably still hang on to because I think that's one that my son will like, and we can read that one together. All right, let's talk about Rachel Kane's Morganville Vampires section for a minute. Oh, I have a signed card. I met her at the Vegas Valley Book Festival also. So, Morganville, not my favorite vampire series, but also one that has a lot of merit. They are really quick reads. That's something that's really in their favor. I love the old school little paperbacks that were, just really thin spine. These ones look better on the shelf, so I bought them for the sake of collection. If you can get past the really gaping hole that none of the situations that this girl finds herself in are plausible for someone her age. You can only play the stupid parents card so long. Like no parent is that stupid or negligent if they actually love their child. So if you can let all of that go, the story is actually quite fun. I like the dynamics in this town. I like a lot of the enigma characters in this town. By far, the stars of the show are the main characters that live in the glass house. And each respective book has been good. There are a couple of different arcs within this series. And the one that I am on now, I don't know, I don't mind picking one up every 6 months to a year and continuing. I think I've only got 3 left before I'm done with the series. And I would like to see how it ends. It's not one of those that I picked up compulsively. There are a bunch of other fantasy and vampire stories in the YA here that, you couldn't hand them to me fast enough. This one was just a casual, I'll fit them in here and there. I really like them. So you have a Morganville Vampire series that I liked. You have by Rachel Kane, and then you have Anna Guire, an author who I've mentioned ad nauseum. She's kind of hit or miss, and this is, unfortunately, a miss from both of these authors for me. So the book is split into 3 different parts. The first part was incredible. I was like, oh my gosh, I have a new favorite here. This is so amazing. And then, you know how in some YA books, they meet the boy and then everything else falls by the wayside. That is the focus of the entire text. And it's just all about the relationship and nothing else matters. Well, if you swap a boy out for this spaceship, this sentient spaceship that this girl is in a working relationship with, and basically you have the structure of a love story without the actual love story. And it just went on and on. Oh my gosh, so many pages of relationship development when all of these other cool ideas that had been introduced in the first part kind of disappeared. All of the cool characters went away, and it was just zeroed in on this one thing, and I did not like it at all. The third part pulled it back just a little bit, but not enough for me to enjoy it. And so, yeah, I think 5-star first part, 1-star second part, and a 2-star third part. So I don't know where that leaves me, but I did not like it. Girl of Fire and Thorns, my all-time favorite young adult fantasy book. It is so unconventional. It is so cool. I love the world building in here. I love the main character. Ray Carson is so good at bringing forth relatable, normal feeling girls. Like, these are not girls who are beautiful and capable and wonderful right from the first page and with really superficial problems. No, this girl is so cool. I love this main character. I love some of the unexpected things that happen in the story. I love that it made me feel something. And I love this one. These ones weren't quite as strong, but I love where it ended, and I feel like I love these by extension of this one. This first book was amazing. These ones don't really hold up quite as strongly, but I still overall love the fact that I read the whole thing. I'm pretty sure I read this and whatever. It wasn't probably worth hanging on to, but it's a compilation of short stories. Moving on. And more Ray Carson. I have the first 2 books here in the Goal Seer series by her. Walk on Earth, a Stranger. It's like a Old West Oregon Trail. This girl can sense gold in the earth, so it has a little bit of magic. It's very much underplayed, but awesome main character, really evoking writing. You really feel enmeshed in the story. I don't really like Wild West type of like old settings or whatever. It's just not my jam, but this one worked so well. And I love the first book. I love the second book. I absolutely hated the third book. I thought it was so pointless. It kind of drug out the plot unnecessarily. So if you read it, I'd say read the second one. Kind of twist the ending in your own head to end it the way you would end it, and then stop there. But yeah, these first 2 are just so cool. Pawn by Amy Carter. Slightly dystopic age, really in line with the type of stuff that I was really loving at the time. I thought it was cool. Great idea. I never read on. There was a good chunk of the plot committed towards this girl learning how to be adept at being a leader. And it was all going to be pivotal around this massive speech she had to give to her people. And then the author took the easy way out and didn't actually write the speech. Like, she just described the girl giving the speech, but didn't actually write the speech. And right there I was like, oh, okay. Like, what a cop-out. It made me mad. Like, this is what? Like, this is what we've been building up to. Why would you not write that in there? My only thought is maybe whatever, I don't know. But see, that's the problem with a lot of those. The ideas are cool, but the world building isn't robust enough to allow for some deep moments like that, and I think that one suffered from it. Graceling. I love these hardcovers. Graceling is such a lovely story, one of the most poignant young adult love stories I've ever read, and not to mention that there's a magic system in here with people who have different graces, which is indicated by 2 different colored eyes. And I just think it's so cool, such a creative story. It was one of the first ones in the genre I had read, and it definitely the rating that I gave it initially definitely benefited from that. But even today, like, I still look at this book so warmly. But I am one of those readers who loves continuity. And so you give me a companion novel and I'll read it and it's a gorgeous cover, but I'm not going to be happy about it. And I actually did really like the story. I'm glad that I read it. The problem is that the pacing is so awful in the first, like, maybe 10-20% of the book. So needed a pacing, like, more concise introduction to this story. Made it really hard to recommend. And then, like, a next-gen continuation, Bitter Blue. I liked this one. I thought some of the decisions she made in it were equal parts horrifying. Like, some of them were horrifying, and then the other half were kind of lame. So I got more than I bargained for on one end, and then didn't get enough of a good payoff on the other end. So as much as I love the cover, I did not love this one as much as I thought I would. But even saying all of that, like, the problems I have with story, I love the writing, and say what you will, but she can create a hell of an atmosphere. So good. And there is a new one, Winterkeep, I think is the name, that came out in this series, and I have not checked that one out yet. Probably because it's been over 10 years since I've read these, and I'm not sure if I remember enough to justify continuing. But yeah, cool series. I lied, evidently this section is going to take just as long as the other ones. I'm always optimistic like that. All You Can Hate on Me. I loved the selection. In storytelling or in media, anything that I watch, if there's an element of competition, I am so there. I love competition. In this instance, not only is it competition, but it's also a social experiment with a lot of personalities and dynamics, and I love the psychology of all that, how people behave in different situations when the stakes are high. And I found everything about this book absolutely satisfying, except for the world building. But see, everything else was so good that she didn't need good world building. And even in the second one, there was enough to carry everything that without the good world building, it's still an awesome read. Like, it's still totally absorbing. And then you run out of the main things that were driving these two, and then get to this one where a trilogy is supposed to have an overall arc. And this is the point where the world building needed to come together and give her a really, like, robust, satisfying thing to have happened to escalate the story to where it needs to be for a massive conclusion. And I don't know if the publisher made her do that, but I think if she had foregone any external conflict and just focused solely on the love story and kept the conflicts within that, then this last book would have been a lot stronger for me. But as it is, it was like, that was a big letdown. That one's signed. I actually did not realize I had a signed copy. That's pretty cool. I haven't been through these a lot. Now, her strengths were at the beginning when she could focus on the relationships. So the very first book in this series, also signed. Sweet. That was pretty freaking good. Like, I really liked this first novel. It delivered on all the promises, all the things I was hoping for with a continuation. And by the way, I love the covers. I love the dresses. And then this one, yep, kind of a letdown. Here's a theme. This companion series, I feel like had I read them in tandem, I would have liked them more. But as it is, like, knowing the resolution to the conflicts and then going out back and trying to read stories within the conflicts that were taking place at the time, so hard to do out of context. Like, I don't care anymore. But in tandem, I bet those would be pretty good. Now, a Kiera Cass book that doesn't get talked about a lot, positively anyway, is The Siren. I loved this book. I didn't expect anything. I got a random copy from the library just on a whim, like, oh yeah, cool, I'll give that a try. And it was absolutely lovely. I love the tone, I love the character, I love the lovely storyline of it, and it was just a random breath of fresh air amidst all the things that I'd been reading. And I mean, it wasn't like the best thing I've ever read, but as a piece of art, that's what I look at that one. That's a piece of art. Like, that is so creative, and yeah, quite like that one. Okay, guilty pleasures. The House of Night novel by PC and Kristen Cast. If you were going to call any young adult vampire series slightly trashy, this would be the one. The characters are, especially the mean girl or whatever, are all incredibly immature. Very hard to read about, especially as the series progresses. But the vampire aspect and the cool world building and the immersion, I love the school setting. At least the first 3 books, like, wildly addicting. I quite enjoyed them. Definitely for older teens. But I thought they were really cool. And then by the time I made it to this novel, the back and forth dialogue between the characters was just so overdone. I was over it by that point, but I still really love the first 3. I probably would even go back and reread these 3 before I would continue the series. Alright, it's kind of dark in here today. Okay, I have a box set of The Testing by Joelle Charbonneau. So I've mentioned I love schools, I mentioned I love competitions, and I read everything dystopian that I could back when it was really popular. This one is one of my favorite ones. I love it when people take tests in books and you can go along for the testing process, and this is an entire trilogy of testing. And it is so cool, the creativity. There's a few, like, really moments because I think she was going for shock value, but it didn't really fit the scene. But aside from that, like, this was such a cool book. And then this one of my all-time favorite books ever. I have a small list on Goodreads marked out of my all-time favorite books, and that's of everything I've ever read. And this one made the list. It was a perfect combination of everything that I enjoyed about the series. I felt like she highlighted all the cool stuff. And I had a ball. I loved reading that trilogy. Oh dear. Okay. City of Bones. I finally picked this up because I was so sick of selling it without knowing what it was about. So many people were raving about the series, and I love YA fantasy. So I read it, and I couldn't help but think the whole time that I was reading it that everything seemed really surface level. like some cool ideas, some interesting characters, but it just lacked depth. Like on paper, the things she was writing about should be wildly interesting to me, but I never felt invested in the story. And I don't know why. I wonder, maybe it's just her type of writing just did not sing to me. And then there was like, there's a thing about the first book where I'm like, she can't possibly be taking that route. So I kind of figured out a massive spoiler. I used my deductive reasoning, and all the tension in the first novel was just gone for me. And so I didn't care. And that was really hard. So yeah, this is one that I feel like I should like a lot more than I did. But I look at those and I go, I don't even remember what happened in there. Kind of good, kind of cool atmosphere. If by some miracle you haven't read them yet, it's got a cool atmosphere and it's got a cool basic plot. I would say it's better for not from a like what the story is about standpoint, but from a writing standpoint, better for younger teens. It's very accessible. That's what I'm trying to say. And then I read this one, and it's a signed copy. That's pretty cool. Okay, signed copy. So I actually liked this one a lot better than the first one. I liked the world building. I thought it was pretty cool. Kind of a steampunk vibe. And had always intended to continue, but I don't believe the other books were out when I was reading it. And so I just never felt compelled to pick it up later. But I did like that one a lot more. But see, now I feel too old for them. Which is funny because I will go back and read the Animorph books over and over again, and there are other YAs that I have no problem picking up now and fully enjoying, but those just, yeah, they just did not work for me as well as I wanted them to. The Firebringer by David Clement Davies. If you're one of those diehard Watership Down lovers, this will give you all the same rich, like total immersion into the woodlands, and instead of rabbits, it's deer. And I thought it was quite well done. As with Watership Down, kind of boring because it's really hard to get behind the conflicts of such an vastly unhuman main perspective. It's not written quite as dense as Watership Down, and it was a really lovely story. I could see teachers using this in classrooms or whatever. Like, what can we learn from this dear story? So, that was interesting. Frickin' loved. So many issues. Like, do we have to do all the things just for shock value? Like, I feel like the purpose of the last, 20% of the book was all just to deliver shock value, and not because it made sense for the story. Not everything. There were a few things I liked, but overall, such a disappointing conclusion for me for a story. But this woman is so good at completely immersing you in what's going on, to the point where a loud noise gets described and I feel it. Like, I feel it reverberate in my body. I feel like I am there. And it is so cool. And I feel the same way about Ballad for the Songbird. Don't remember the exact name, but the prequel one that she came out with, and the pacing of that one was so slow. I think that's why a lot of people had a hard time reading it, but all of the basic writing elements that I love her for were present in that one as well, even though I didn't really care for the story. So yeah, beautiful writer. I hope she comes out with something else. Something with an element of competition would be awesome. Yet again, another girls in pretty dresses in a slightly dystopic age. This is the one that I wanted to like the most. Oh, I thought I had a signed copy. Oh, fine. Anyway, this is the one I wanted to like the most because the author is somewhat local and she did a lot of events for our store. And the book was kind of thin. I was a little bored with it. I don't know, I got a little bit of feedback that the next two were just about the same, so if you weren't loving the first book, then you might not like the rest of the series, but eventually I might make an effort to finish that one. Nightshade. I got this as an ARC, and I love this cover. I think it is so cool. It's kind of hard to tell in this light, but it's it's shiny, like she's got like whatever. Anyway, and then they went and did this with the rest of the covers. Like, they're not atrocious. Oh, that one's kind of atrocious, but like when you have something as beautiful as this that's so eye-catching, why would you go and do this? And this is not the cover that ended up being published either, to my knowledge. Anyway, I really like this first book. This is a werewolf story. I like the main characters. I like the conflict. And I think a lot of people would like this story, but it just did not, I did not care for these ones as much as the first one. Here we go again with that same sentiment, right? Ooh, and last but not least, on my shelves, the Chemical Garden trilogy by Lauren DeStefano. I loved these. Absolutely loved these. I felt like the trilogy was strong as a whole. It was such a cool atmosphere. It was so eerie. Everything was wildly interesting. The situations were plausible. I don't know. Like, I could go with it. I could suspend my disbelief long enough to go with it. Let's put it that way. And one of the most well-written dystopian novels amidst all of them. And I absolutely love this series. So there we have it, our first week in the YA section. And I think I talked a lot more in here than I have in a while. Thanks so much for joining me on this week's tour. I really didn't think I'd have that much to say about it, but in hindsight, we are going through like the cream of the crop of the hundreds and hundreds of young adult books that I read. These ones are the ones that have remained in my collection because I really liked them. Most of them anyway. There are a few things that I really do need to make some decisions on. But yeah, my favorites. It'll be interesting to see how much I have to say about the ones I haven't read yet. I hope you enjoyed the tour, even some of those of you who follow my content mostly for the adult spec fic stuff. Like, I hope it was still interesting. And yeah, I'm grateful you're here. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to catch you next time. Bye.